Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
It's episode 128 of Exploring Tolkien. Of A Song of Ice and Fire. We're here No, we're back, everybody. It was a weird week last week, man. What a way to start the new year for you, huh? If you don't know, we missed last week. I put out a little short episode letting you guys know. But Michael lives, in fact, I used to live very close to where the Eaton Fire in Southern California devoured the entire city, almost the entire city. I don't know. You can tell us more about it, but of Altadena. And not like just in the foothills. This thing came down a main street quite a ways and burned places that I have been to. So yeah, you're okay. You were evacuated for a while. Tell us a little bit about it, because I know people are curious. And we got a couple of emails from folks too, asking how you're doing. So sorry I didn't email you back right away, but yeah, Michael, we will let you know.
Sure. Well, we can start on a personal note. Yep. Apologies to all our listeners. I was indeed out of power and evacuated from my home last week. Now, the city I live in is next to Altadena. It isn't Altadena. Mm-hmm. And the fire did not spread to our city, but or it didn't spread much, I should say, but we did lose power, and a lot of people that we know as part of my school community, church community, lost their homes. And so it was devastation unlike I've ever seen. I took a few kids joined me the 2 days after the fire started, or the next day, Wednesday or Thursday, and we drove up and wound our way. I knew some back ways in. Because we wanted to see what was going on, and there were some houses that we wanted to check on for people that couldn't get back in. And I used to think that Hollywood, when you see apocalyptic pictures of destruction or such, that you see all this rubble where buildings used to be, and then there's random fires in the middle of the rubble. And I always thought that was Hollywood being Hollywood, it's just to make it look like, oh, it's destruction, like fires. And because I always thought, what's burning? It's rubble, and clearly nothing. Yeah. Well, it turns out that's actually real. and as you are driving down the streets, it just looked like a hellscape. It was and there was whole blocks leveled of these homes, and this is not Pacific Palisades. These are mostly single family homes.
And a lot of these are homes that have been around a long time, and these were built probably the 50s, maybe 40s. 30s?
A lot of them in the 50s, some of them in the 30s and 20s. It depends which parts.
And so the toughest part is like it's generational wealth, in the sense that it's been passed down, and so the tax burden is not very high on these $1 million homes that were bought for $20,000 60 years ago, 70 years ago. And so now they rebuild, and all of a sudden their taxes of a few $1,000s goes up to $15,000 a year or $20,000 a year.
Right. A lot of people are just going to be selling the land and leaving. The destruction level is unreal. As probably some of you know, this is now officially the most destructive fire in American history. Yeah. And it was well. So a lot of people lost their homes. So we're lucky and blessed to not have done so. But I was for most of a week and a half, I was unavailable for things.
You were out of your house and checking to make sure the looters weren't.
Right. Yeah, and that exactly. There was a lot of that too, and it was pretty crazy. A lot of people that take advantage of these kinds of situations.
Well, I'm glad you're back, and I'm taking advantage of your time now. So thanks for thanks for doing this again, even though life is turned upside down and things are crazy over there.
Happy to be back in Middle Earth. It's but unfortunately, the entire chapter is about fire. So a little PTSD going on here.
Oh, well, let's start off on a better note then. And that's going to be our Hobbit fact.
Hobbit facts.
Okay, some of you remember that 2 weeks ago when we had this episode, we talked about giants and how Gandalf said he would need a more or less decent giant to shut the door, right? And so Derek pointed out that
yes.
Derek and okay, I'm getting this right because my notes are a little bit wonky right now. So Derek in our YouTube comments, he pointed out that Ents are in a way giants are in a way giants because it is Old English for giant. And then Terry, also in YouTube comments, he brought this up, an interesting paper written by a scholar named Chris Bishop about the difference between or the title of the paper is Anglo-Saxon ontologies of giant, the 4 different words that Anglo-Saxons use for giant: Thyrst, T-H-Y-R-S, Ent, Eoten, and Gigans, G-I-G-A-N-S. I'm not sure how to pronounce that in Old English, actually. In any case, they all have slightly different meanings. And Ent, in particular, is a more anyway, like a wicked or a warring giant in a way. They brought about destruction. So it's interesting that, again, if you didn't know, that the word Ent is actually an old Anglo-Saxon word for giant. So in a sense, you could say Tolkien had giants still in the Lord of the Rings, even though he didn't really have human giants in there at all. Although let's remember, to hobbits, everybody is a giant. So perhaps we have giants.
That's right.
Sorry, that was dumb. All right, so there you go.
We're all giants.
We're all giants, and Tolkien kept giants in. He just didn't want to put in human giants, and I think he succeeded in a better way than. I imagine a bunch of big giants instead of Ents. That would have been far less interesting. If the shepherds of the trees were actually just big people, no good.
Yeah.
Then it becomes like a McDonald's menu: small, medium, and large people. You know, it's just sort of weird.
Yeah. I mean, even with Ents, there's weird things. Like I was recently told that Ents like capture people and put them in weird cages where they can easily escape.
Stop!
And for no
I'm
reason,
usually the one who makes the bad Rings of Power analogies. The shepherds of the people and the weavers of human cages.
Yeah.
So odd. All right. Hey, everybody, we're going to get into the second part of chapter 6. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. And we will have an extended episode, which you can get by going to theonery.com/member, become a member to get the extended podcast and join our Discord. This comes out. You guys will have missed our monthly chat. We're doing it on January 20th. That's Monday, January 20th. And we do it once a month. So hopefully you can join us there. We'll post a link in Discord in order to join that. We posted it on Zoom because Discord's video is kind of wonky. So we just use Zoom instead and it works pretty well. Unless you don't have a link like Michael last time, where he was like, you were looking for it, and I was like, here, let me just send it to the email because your Discord, anyway, we won't get into that. And
something happened to my Discord.
You had.
It was weird.
Yeah, we're all good. So join us there by going to theonery.com/member, $4 a month, or theonery.com/Patreon. It's $5 a month because they take more money because they're evil corporate overlords. Sorry,
everyone wants the money. January 20th is an interesting day to have a chat. I just put it together. It's Inauguration Day.
Oh, it is. Well, things come second, so.
Oh yeah.
Trump will have to wait.
It'll all be over by then.
All right, let's get into the second part of Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire, and this is essentially once Bilbo has been revealed and the wargs start coming. Michael, can you give us a brief overview of this chapter?
Yes.
So we're all on
yes,
the same
and
page.
I will start with before I lay out the sequence. I would just say what I found most interesting about this half of the chapter is we talked last time about how he kind of opens up his exploration of the world, and he talks quite a bit. He explores the geography of this side of the Misty Mountains as they're in the first half of the chapter. This half of the chapter, he is, if half you call it, I think it's actually more than half. But this half of the chapter, we explore all the different peoples of different types, creatures and peoples of this part of the Misty Mountains and the lands beyond. We hear about wargs, which we haven't heard about before. We're given an in-depth discussion about their attitude towards things and their alliance with the goblins. We hear about the woodmen who have come north and caused the consternation amongst the wargs and who are about to be set upon by them if Gandalf and the dwarves and Bilbo hadn't rudely interrupted the wargs. And we learn about the eagles and their culture, so to speak, and their relations with others. And it's fascinating because it feels to me like he's really fleshing it out. So narratively, this half of the chapter is essentially after sliding down the side of the mountain, the little landslide, they come upon this clearing with trees in it of all sorts, and then all of a sudden there are growls, and they immediately have to escape up the trees because they are almost immediately surrounded by wargs, and the wargs were not following them. The wargs were actually going to meet here in this place and are very concerned and angry that the dwarves and Gandalf and Bilbo are there. So they're stuck up in the tree. Gandalf, the wargs have a big meeting there, complete with a warg chieftain, and Gandalf drives or starts to drive them off with the original fireball, which Dungeons and Dragons wrongly failed to note that it is actually blue. The original fireballs are blue, as it turns out. It's blue fire on pine cones. It says. So anyway, he almost drives them off, but then the goblins come, and the goblins turn the fire against the dwarves and Gandalf and the Hobbit by ringing the trees with fire. Going to roast them all, and then singing a song, because this would not be Tolkien if a chapter went by without songs. So we have this time it's the goblins that are singing, and then at the last possible moment, the goblins are foiled. The goblins and wargs are foiled by the great eagles, who come down, attack the goblins, drive them far enough away to save Gandalf and the dwarves, and they carry them back to their eyries. And there, a conversation is had, and we get a lot of agoraphobic moments from Bilbo, and then they are given some food, or given the makings for food and fuel and animals, and they have a meal, and Bilbo falls into a deep sleep and has a weird dream. The end. That's the end of our chapter.
Wow, that was good. One problem: the fireballs are actually many colors. I just want to point out.
Oh, okay. But it says he lit them with the
red
blue
and
flame.
green.
So, but it says when it first says, it says he lit them with a blue flame. So he's got a butane lighter, apparently of some kind. A large
it's for the pipe, man.
lighter.
It's way easier to light a pipe with a butane lighter than it is with a match. I mean, let's be honest.
That's right. That's right. All right, you're right. The fireballs were many colors.
Yes.
But he lit them with blue flame. So anyway,
let's talk about let's start with the wolves, because the wolves are something that wargs. Is reminiscent. Wargs, wolves. I know, yes, he calls the wolves and wargs here, but I mean,
yes.
So the wolves, they're very, like, the animals still are very anthropomorphic, right? They actually have a meeting place, and they have a leader, and like some sort of culture almost around, that, and then they have an alliance with the orcs, strange though it might be, and so this is, if it very, again, something out of place in the Lord of the Rings, but very in place for a story like The Hobbit. And so again, the idea that he has switched over completely into a story like the Lord of the Rings after going through the Misty Mountains and stumbling on Elrond and things like that never truly completely happens in here. But you know what's interesting about this is I realized he never makes the wargs speak. We don't hear them speak. They don't have any actual quoted words. It's just Gandalf
you mean
translating
lines of dialogue.
Yes, sorry,
right,
a better way of putting it. Yeah. So whereas the eagles do, and they don't, and it's almost like I felt like Tolkien didn't want that to happen. And there's a lot of exposition about what they say, and it, like, the whole, if you would have heard what they said, you would have you would have been frightened to death, right where you said. I can't remember the exact words. But I thought the wargs, they're almost too, for me, they're almost too human. There's too much to them, but it's still a kid's book. I don't know. What was your take on the wargs? How do you feel about it after going through it?
Well,
trying to place it in Middle Earth.
It's interesting to me that it's an interesting connection between this and the Fellowship of the Ring, where we have the encounter with wargs of a kind, but weirdly they don't seem to be normal wolves at all. And so, but in both cases there's an intelligence to them, but Tolkien seems to have shifted the kind of intelligence that he wants. He almost wants Narnia animals in the first case, and then in the second case he wants kind of like possessed spirit wolves, because if you remember from the Fellowship of the Ring and the fight on the Burnt Tor, there's no remnants there of their bodies the next morning, and not even of being dragged off or anything. Like all the slain wargs are they just sort of disappear. Even the ones killed by Legolas's arrows, arrowheads are still there, and there's no body, which is so they're kind of unnatural. In both cases, they're shown to be intelligent. They have a type of intelligence that normal wolves don't have. But he does seem to have abandoned the sort of anthropomorphic works. But he did not, interestingly enough, for the eagles. But for the wargs, what I think is it's almost I feel the vibe of Tolkien telling a story to his children. I can almost see it, like him standing there and describing having the dwarves and Bilbo and Gandalf having slid down the side of the mountain in that little rock slide, and then him talking about and what's funny about it is you almost see the connection. Like what does Bilbo have? Bilbo has got this wondrous treasure, an invisible ring, and the very next thing that Tolkien throws into the story is now all of a sudden they're surrounded by wolves, and magic ring does you no good. He points that out because wolves can smell, and they can kill you by your scent, by following you with your scent. And so he immediately kind of nullifies what makes Bilbo special, and to put him in danger again from these creatures. They are kind of like a tool, a narrative tool. To put the dwarves. I mean, and it's primitive compared. I don't want to. I'm not bad mouthing him, but it's a primitive storytelling technique compared to what he gets to in the Lord of the Rings.
And you know, and I guess it makes sense now that I think about it, in the sense that wolves, like there's precedent for wolves when you think of Karkaroth, right? Remember, and Sauron's werewolf that he becomes.
Yes, wolves. They do figure.
And so the great, I don't know, the great animals tend to do battle in a way. And so it makes sense that the eagles would come, even though they're there to save them to wolves. But also, when you think about it, right, they're kind of close to Dol Guldur. And maybe, Sauron, werewolf, he had thought about it a little bit. Let's see, this was 37. I don't know, had he started working on the Fall of Numenor yet? And because that was the time travel story he was writing in a competition.
But was there werewolves?
I don't think so. Well, no, Sauron though. Sauron would have come into that story. That's where Sauron. But I mean, I'm just thinking, like, where was his mind? Actually, in the history of the Hobbit, he does make this one comment.
Okay.
Where he says that Thu is the original Sauron, THU with the little angle thing above it. Thu's identification with wolves in the Lay of Lathian, which Tolkien was working on simultaneously with the original drafting of The Hobbit, is so great that his title as Master of Wolves almost tends to overwhelm his identification in that work as the Necromancer. So it might have been something that he was just thinking about, the wolf as Thu in the Lay of Lathian, and it made its way also here into The Hobbit, which kind of makes sense. And the other thing that I learned, and I'd heard this in the past too, but warg is Old English for wearg, Weargd, which not only means wolf, but also means accursed one, outlaw, felon, or criminal. So, they're bad guys. They're bad guys.
Yeah, and there's an intelligence to them. It's really interesting because in my head canon now, I can connect the dots between something that was always kind of interesting to me about Gandalf in this point. It says he's listening to the wargs, and the dwarves and Bilbo don't understand what the wargs are saying because they're speaking in their own dreadful language, but Gandalf does. And I wondered for a long time, how did Gandalf, like, how do you learn the language of the wargs if you're Gandalf? They don't write anything. There's no way to like study their language. You'd have to talk with them, but they're all evil, and so you'd have to talk with them long enough to learn. And so, but if Sauron is Lord of Wolves, Master of Wolves, so with the Maiar connection, Gandalf.
There you go. Yeah,
there might be a path to Gandalf understanding the speech of things like that. Essentially, Sauron is a kind of. I know some people are going to scree at this, but it's their they're kind of cousins. I mean, Maiar are all in a way related to each other, not in a way that human families are related necessarily, but they are of the same type, and so or of similar type anyway. So anyway, there's maybe a connection there. Maybe there's some power with. I mean, clearly Radagast can speak with beasts, and it makes a point in Lord of the Rings to say he knows the tongues of all the beasts, I believe. So Gandalf presumably doesn't know all the beasts, but he knows wargs. So for what that's worth, I can I give a shout out to my to the dwarf of the chapter, which is Dory. I mean, like Dory's like always. It's really funny. I'd forgotten this, but you know, they have a very what's becoming a kind of tropish dwarven argument when all the dwarves are up in a tree and Gandalf is up in a tree and Bilbo's stuck on the ground because he can't climb up trees. And there's no branches low enough for him to climb. And so finally, they have an argument, and whose fault is it that the burglar's left behind again? And then Dory gets told to get down, and he does. And in the face of these oncoming wolves, he lets Bilbo climb on his back to get up in the tree, and then just in time gets himself up there. And then and there's a little conversation from Dory, and then there's Dory and Bilbo are carried by the same eagle, and they have an exasperated conversation when Bilbo is really scared of the heights and talking about things. And then Dory comes in again. I think at the end, maybe the eagle was the last one. I'm trying to remember, but anyway, I thought there were 3 times that Dory came in. So it's funny because we don't really think. I mean, like Balin, you think of Thorin, of course, and then Philly and Killy, who spoiler alert, are going to die, and they're the youngest, and they're always, and then Bomber, who's lots of
which the movie decided like, hey, he's fat, we'll make him funny.
Well, Tolkien says he's fat.
Well, no, I know, but they said he's fat. Okay, now that we know Tolkien said he's fat, that means he's got to be the comic relief. And he was pretty much the sole comic relief in the film.
He was.
Whereas the connection that Dory and Bilbo have, I love because it's missed comic moments between two people. One who begrudgingly, but with courage, bears Bilbo around, even though he doesn't really want to, which is, doing the right thing and when you don't want to is harder to do than doing the right thing when it's easy. And so he does the right thing. So I don't know. I like that. I noted that and the Tolkien makes the comment again, right? Dory was really a decent fellow.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like in spite of his grumbling, it's what I was told when I was younger. I was always like, oh, I don't want to do that, and then I would do it anyway. And then there were other people who said, yeah, sure, I'll do that, and then they don't end up doing it. And so when I had to do stuff, I was always like, oh yeah, I'll do it, or I'll only do it if I have to grumble through it, and that's Dory for me.
Exactly. And what's great about this, and I had also, I don't know if I've forgotten, I remember seeing it before or hearing, picturing it before a few times, but it lost my memory in between this and the last reading of it, which was a few years ago, and was that Bilbo is saved by grabbing onto Dory's ankles. So the eagle doesn't actually grab Bilbo. Eagle grabs Dory, and Bilbo just in time grabs on Dory's ankles, which leads to one of those comic moments that you were talking about, where it says Bilbo never forgot that flight clinging to Dory's ankles. He moaned, my arms, but Dory groaned, my poor legs, my poor legs.
So good. So, dude, I think about that, and I hear of there was a guy, like, I don't know how many years ago, 10 years back or so, who was doing tandem, hang gliding. So he was the guy below, and there was another, the instructor was above him, like they were kind of doing it together. And the instructor went off before he was totally strapped in. Ooh. And he had to hang on to the bar, like with his arm and like with his crook of his elbow, and like stay in there until he could land the thing. And he did that. He was able to do it, and he pulled his arm out of his socket and like tore a ligament or tore a muscle just by hanging on for that long. And so just hanging on to the eagles, I think of this guy who was only in the air for like 5 or 6 minutes, but the weight of him hanging on to like through all that and the adrenaline that kept him going would be like Bilbo. Like poor Dory was getting the legs torn out of his sockets while Bilbo was getting his shoulder yanked out of his.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that's brutal stuff. See, this is how absolutely brutal it is. And in fact, well, no, maybe we'll talk about the brutality of the Goblin song in just a little bit. I
guess one thing to mention is that the dwarves, the plan, rather, not the dwarves, the wargs. The wargs' plan is to get together with the goblins and go and destroy the civilization, the town or villages that the woodmen and their families have been sort of establishing and driving the wolves off, the wargs off. And that's the horrible part, as Tolkien relates it, is if they had understood, how terrible it was, because the wargs were talking about what they were going to do to the woodsmen and their families.
Yeah, these poor woodsmen too. I got to say, they're also they're afraid of the eagles and the wargs and the orcs. They're really living on the edge of danger here.
Right. Well, it's kind of like the American pioneers in a way. It's them versus every living creature out there in the wilderness as they forge their way north and try to establish civilization.
Yeah. And one last thing about the wargs is that even though they have this anthropomorphic human cultural thing where they have a meeting place and leader and all that, once they get into danger, like they catch on fire, they become completely animalistic, right? The leader, he starts going after his own wolves and snapping at them and biting them, despite being the leader. Like he somehow descends into the madness of his animalness then too, and so it kind of notches them down, brings them down a level from them being some sort of intellectual beings, and whereas the eagles don't really descend into that at all ever.
Right. Yeah, and the eagles do have dialogue, right?
And they do. Yeah. All right, so let's get on the orcs. So the orcs come, the goblins come, and they see the hobbits and the hobbits and the dwarves up in the trees, and they come up with the plan, and that's to sing a song.
I mean, they are just waiting for everything to burn down, right?
I know. So what they do is they catch the brush on fire and they put a ring around. They stamp out around where they're up in the trees, and they let the fires, and they put kindling around the bottom, the base of the trees, right? And then they let the fire burn in and start catching the base of the trees on fire as they keep it
Turns out, goblins in Middle Earth do a better job of controlled burns than California's government.
I thought about that too. I re-listened to the chapter by Andy Serkis. Andy Serkis does a great job with the voice of the orcs and the singing of the songs. By the way, if you want to listen to a really good rendition of the audiobook of The Hobbit, go get Andy Serkis's. It is better than whoever did the last one. I didn't care for that one. It was funny. So what they do though is they begin a horrible song, a song that starts with 15 birds in 5 fir trees. Their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze, but funny little birds, they had no wings. Oh, what shall we do with the funny little things? Roast them alive or stew them in a pot, fry them, boil them, and eat them hot. And then Gandalf just decides to, after hearing that, he's going to just roil them even further and calls them, go away, little birds. It isn't bird nesting time. Also, naughty little boys that play with fire get punished. I thought, oh, there's a nice little dig. Right, the teaching moment of this chapter for Tolkien is he was telling it to his children.
Oh, right. I didn't think of that. That's good.
We'll get punished. Then they get angrier, and man, this song takes a dark turn.
Yeah.
So, let me read it out loud. They went on saying this: burn, tree and fern, shrivel and scorch a fizzling torch, to light the night for our delight. Yeah, hey, I mean, they're going to burn the dwarves for their delight. They're going to light the night with the burning dwarves' bodies, the sizzling flesh, the fat bubbling off their bodies. Okay.
Well, they even go into that.
Yeah, bake and toast them, fry and roast them, till beards blaze and eyes glaze, till hair smells and skins crack, fat melts and bones black in cinders lie beneath the sky. So dwarves shall die and light the night for our delight. Ya hey, ya Harry, hey, ya hoy. Just like the elves in Rivendell, they have their little shout of glee at the end of this. But man, this is dark.
This is dark. Yeah.
So they might be singing a song, but my gosh, if you're a kid reading this here, you're like, oh, this is serious. This is not a safe space for the dwarves in the trees. This is far beyond that.
Yeah. And this is not a children's show with this. Yeah. What's funny is it's a children's story, but clearly Tolkien didn't mind being fairly gruesome when it came to expressing the goblins' point of view.
This is my thing. It's okay to bring real danger, real fear into a children's story for a couple of reasons. One is that you got to make the stakes real. If the only danger you're in is of like missing dinner or something, no kid's going to really worry about this here. But he made the stakes real, and that in order to actually have I want to, and not necessarily you catastrophic moment, but a moment of the winning moment for good to actually come in and take over. And I'm trying to find the right phrase for this. There's got to be a literary phrase I'm missing here. If you don't have actual stakes in the game, you will never have an actual climax that is satisfying. Maybe that's the best way of putting it, right?
That's
and
right.
it's
I think
okay,
that's
right? And if kids experience this real danger of this story, there's no way to ever have a real hero, right? The real hero, the hero won't matter if the stakes aren't real. And so this is what I liked about this here. The orcs aren't just bumbling; they aren't stumbling over each other. Gollum did try to, he said he would eat Bilbo, never did. But here, I mean, they're talking about their eyes glazing. They're talking about their fat melting off their body. I mean, this is
skin cracking, bones blacking.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is what I like. And it reminds me still of, I think I brought this up in episodes past. When I was a little kid, we had this old German book called Struwwelpeter, which is old German stories from, I looked it up before this year, it was 1859, where they have stories of like, you play with matches, you'll burn and you'll catch your hair on fire and die. You suck your thumbs, then the mad tailor from town is going to come out and chop your thumbs off with his giant scissors. Those sorts of stories that you put real fear in you, and you stop sucking your thumbs because you're afraid you're not going to have any thumbs anymore. but this is the thing. Like, I think kids are coddled too much, and I like that the story doesn't do that. That was my quick takeaway from here.
Yep. There's got to be a little bit of a toughness, and this is the thing. Like Tolkien, as we have said many times, is clearly telling a children's story, especially in relation to Lord of the Rings. But nevertheless, what a children's story means is not something that is insultingly stupid or watered down. There is real danger. There's real, and in this case, I mean, this is well beyond PG language. Like, this is PG-13 at least. If it had been shown, if the thing had actually happened, then we're beyond PG-13.
This is in a way, right? Do you remember in the movies, Peter Jackson? This is where, like, after they left Hobbit in the movies, lost me. But this is where the white orc Azog comes in and finds them, and he's after them. So the wargs aren't a thing. The orcs coming down, wanting to burn them. Like, this is actually more frightening in the way if this was made into the jeering, lusty kind of evil that these orcs have, would have been far better than this all CGI white orc that we don't care about and have no relation to and don't worry about. At least the orcs would have been the orcs that Bilbo had to escape from. They're the ones that are well, I don't even know if the ones in the film were that bad, but the dwarves had to escape from, right? So it was I like this way better. I like the fear that's put into it.
Yep, exactly.
All right,
exactly.
So this is when the eagles come.
Yep.
And so just again, guys, if you want to, Michael and I are going to talk about whether the eagles are too much deus ex machina, right? The hand of God coming in a sense, right? The moving, and because there's no other way out, and so the eagles come. Does Tolkien use this too much? We're going to talk about that in our extended podcast. So you can get that by becoming a member, theonering.com/member.
And we're definitely not going to talk about the eagles flying the ring to Mordor.
Never. We're never going to talk about that. Or flying the dwarves to the Lonely Mountain. That's an option. No, how come we can't do that? All right.
Yeah, why not?
So the eagles are, like you said, they do talk. They do have a conversation, and they actually see the commotion of the fire going on, and there's no moth that Gandalf talks to that somehow makes its way over leagues and leagues to an eagle up in its high nest in the peaks of the Misty Mountains. But they do come, and they see that. Let me get the quote here. Oh, do you have it? I want to read the first thing. The Lord of Eagles was filled with curiosity to know what was afoot, so he summoned many other eagles to him, and they flew away from the mountains, and slowly circling ever round and round, they came down, down, down towards the ring of the wolves and the meeting place of the goblins. And so they saw what was happening,
So is it true to say then that the Lord of the Eagles then fell down into a burning ring of fire?
It is not true that you don't. Though the burning ring of fire was happening, it was a ring of fire.
I mean, he went down, and there was a burning ring of fire.
So Johnny Cash, let me see, is Johnny Cash a fan of J.R.R. Tolkien?
Yeah,
Johnny Cash. No, I'm joking.
He was after the Lord of the Rings, so he could have known.
Okay, so Tolkien, he points out that eagles, one, were not kindly birds, but they didn't love goblins or fear them, and really, or even take any notice of them, because they didn't eat such creatures, as Tolkien said. When they took any notice of them at all, which was seldom, for they did not eat such creatures, they swooped on them and drove them shrieking back to their caves and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated the eagles and feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats or drive them from the mountains. It's weird because the eagles aren't really like, they're not noble. Do you know what I mean? They're not doing this for the good of Middle Earth.
Well, we're going to talk about this more in the extended edition, but the differences between the eagles in the books, but they are, suffice it to say, the eagles in although there's the similarity of saving the day in the Hobbit, they do save the day twice. Nevertheless, they are not there's no hint that they're like the messengers of Manwë. There's no Silmarillion connection that I caught. I don't know if you caught anything, but I caught nothing. In fact, it was just basically describing. I mean, they describe their relationship, the eagles' relationship. It says even some are cowardly and cruel, so they're not all good. And they're an ancient race. They're proud. They're eagles. They won't get close to they won't fly the dwarves and Gandalf and Bilbo to the woodsmen, because the woodsmen will shoot at them with their bows because they think they're coming to kill their sheep, which the Lord of Eagles
do,
and I do, which is correct. Yeah. They would shoot at us with their great big bows of yew, but they would think we were after their sheep, and at other times they would be right.
Yeah, and it's funny because what do they bring the dwarves to eat? Oh, a sheep.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah.
From the woodman. But that passage near the end of the chapter actually tells you the eagle's motivations. He says, "No, this is the Lord of the Eagles. We are glad to cheat the goblins of their sport, and glad to repay our thanks to you, but we will not risk ourselves for dwarves in the Southwood Plains."
Yeah, so because Gandalf had pulled an arrow from.
Right. So, which is why, for example, they come down and they save Gandalf first. They don't appear to be saving the dwarves until basically right afterwards. Yeah. So it's entirely conceivable that when the eagles came the first time, they would just be coming to spoil the goblin sport, in the words of the Lord of the Eagles. And there's this kind of wild animal nature to them, right? They're eagles. They might be ancient. They're highly intelligent and they can speak, but at the end of the day, they're raptors. They're huge raptors, and they have a very cool sense of sport, and they're quick to behave like large birds would.
Yeah. Yeah. This is I've never really done a deeper dive on eagles in Tolkien's works, and so I decided I would take a moment and do that. And I thought, okay, let's talk about how big Tolkien's eagles are. And I'm talking Middle Earth here because I think these ones are a little smaller, because they're grabbing the shoulders of one dwarf or one wizard at a time, right? So they're not like huge like they were essentially in Peter Jackson's films. They were smaller. However, the one time Tolkien describes Thorondor, he describes Thorondor, the Lord of the Eagles, he describes him as having a wingspan of 30 fathoms, which is 180 feet.
That's pretty darn huge.
That's 2/3 of a football field. So that's big. And when you think a bald eagle is 7.5 feet, that's pretty big. Those are very large birds. So what is that? 25 times bigger than a bald eagle. Those are large birds. That was number one.
You might say that that Thorondor was the largest. It's of his.
Yes, that's
probably
true. There could be
probably. But we have a couple other eagles. Landreval and Menildor, I think, were the two the other eagles that were. I don't think they're mentioned here, but they, so eagles have great eagles are in fact huge.
Yes,
in
yes.
Tolkien's world.
But it's hard to figure out, like like dragons. There are different sizes of dragons in Tolkien's world too, right? So, of which
Right.
again, Smaug was a small one, and so here we have, I think, different sizes of eagles. Particularly in here, I don't think again this was like these are the eagles of Manwë that he was necessarily.
Wait, hold on. Why do you say Smaug was small? It said it was one of the greatest of
Was he?
worms. Yeah, no, he was
Well,
not small. I don't think. I mean, he wasn't on Calagon the Black. But
yeah,
was,
maybe that's what I was thinking.
But and he wasn't Glaurung. He was, the winged dragons were not.
But those are really the only other two important named dragons, are in Calagon and Smaug.
Yeah, I don't know how large Glaurung was. Honestly, I don't. I know that he was large enough to crawl over a ravine and have two halves of his body on one side and the other, so that he could be stabbed from underneath. But
yeah. Okay,
anyway.
sorry, I take it back. I just always thought of him as a little bit smaller, just because I know Glaurung was so huge, and Calagon the Black was like many times larger than Glaurung. So, okay, that's the first thing I wanted to say about eagles. And the second thing about eagles is, I believe, I looked it up. I believe this is the only time eagles actually we see the dialogue of the eagles. There is no other dialogue of the eagles anywhere in the Silmarillion or the Lord of the Rings that I could find. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure, because the only other time what he says is the eagles, a number of times he say the eagles brought tidings, and so they're messengers, and they're not communicators. They're not going to give us a monologue about what they think.
Right, they don't have lines of dialogue.
They don't have lines of dialogue.
Yeah, right.
So this is the only time we actually hear them speak in all of Tolkien's works.
Yep, I think you're right. Which is interesting because again, anyway, I'm going to hold off on that comment because we'll wait until the
extended podcast.
Yep.
Last one is like, why eagles? Why is Tolkien interested in eagles? And this here also in the History of the Hobbit book, the author makes this point that in Christian iconography, the eagle is associated with John the Evangelist, who was Tolkien's stated favorite apostle, which he said in a 1969 letter to Amy Ronald.
Oh, nice.
And so I was like, okay, well, maybe that's a thing. Also, eagles are pretty cool.
I mean, they are, and they did just officially become the national emblem, right?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, and they've been used, since Roman times as banner bearers. Yeah,
the imperial eagle. It was a thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Also, with societies that tried to imitate the Romans, like the Third Reich,
like
they were big on eagle standards.
Like the back of all the American money we've got.
Yep,
there's an eagle on the back of that
too. By noble and evil alike, eagles are admired.
So that's the eagles. The eagles are, I think, a little bit smaller than Peter Jackson made them out to be, but they are still very, very large in this book. They take the Hobbit, and they take the wizard, and they take the dwarves up to the Carrack. I believe that's what it's called, the Carrack Rock, or just the Carrack?
Carrack.
And Bilbo is afraid that they're going to be eaten. And thankfully he realizes, no, they won't be eaten, and that Gandalf has a good relationship with them. And then he falls into a sleep. I don't know. Is there anything to say about what happens between them and the eagles up there?
I thought it was funny that how casual the eagles were about bringing fire up into their nests area. That was kind of interesting.
Oh.
It wouldn't be fire wouldn't be a thing they would like to be around. Eagles don't use fire, so. But anyway, they're fine. They bring up dry boughs for fuel, it says, and rabbits, hares, and a small sheep. And it says Bilbo was too weak to help. Anyways, he was not much good at skinning rabbits or cutting up meat, being used to having it delivered by the butcher all ready to cook.
Funny.
Bilbo's the oligarchy.
Somebody needs to do a study, and maybe it's me, about every time that there's an analogy or an adjectival reference to the hobbits, I bet 75% of them have to deal with food.
There are a lot of them.
That's the first thing always on his mind, right? And so he thinks about his his larder back home, and he thinks about his kitchen, and that he doesn't think about like going out on a boat in the middle of the lake or the river or taking a stroll. No, it's always about food. And so even here we get all these references where, it's about food, because even at the last paragraph, after he'd eaten, Tolkien wrote, soon Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he felt he could sleep contentedly, though really he would have liked the loaf and butter and better than bits of meat toasted on sticks. I'm like, see, it's
again,
like, it's
with
the
food.
It's
Yep.
food. But I love that because it brings it home to us too, right? What comforts us is the good food of home that we love, right?
It is true, and if you think about it from a logistic perspective, if hobbits, since hobbits regularly they like 6 meals a day,
Yeah.
basically your whole life is then concerned with the preparation of food, the consumption of food,
That's a
and the
really good
cleanup
point.
from the
Yeah,
consumption
yeah,
of food,
yeah.
and then you start over again in some fashion for the next meal. So
Huh. Yeah, you're pretty much making food, eating food, putting dishes away, cleaning the dishes, getting the
start
dishes
over
out,
again.
and starting over again. Right. Right. So that morning before the first meal and that nighttime after the last meal, that's the only time you have to actually do anything of consequence, which would be going to the butcher and getting the food.
Right, right.
So
Or
let's
having it
talk.
delivered in Bilbo's case, right?
Yeah, right, right. Yeah. So let's talk about the dream he has, because I think this is the most interesting part of the whole chapter in a way, because it's the
And it's just
least.
one sentence.
It's just one sentence. Go ahead. Do you have it there?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead and read it.
Well, I'll read the sentence before too. He slept curled up on the hard rock more soundly than he ever done on his feather bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamed of his own house and wandered in his sleep into all his different rooms, looking for something that he could not find nor remember what it looked like.
What do you think that is in reference to?
The ring, of course.
Okay, that's what I thought too.
Yes.
There's
So
and
he couldn't find the ring. He can't find the ring, like Gollum couldn't find the ring.
right.
He doesn't even know what it is, like Gollum didn't know what the ring was in Bilbo's pocket. So there's like it's an object he's searching for, and it's I think it's the ring beginning to draw him into. Now maybe that wasn't Tolkien's original intent when he first wrote it, because when he first wrote it there was no
Yeah,
sinister aspect to the
right,
to the
right,
magic
and
ring.
that's why I was wondering, because in the history of the Hobbit, in the original draft that they have in that book, it's the same sentence, but it's not the ring of power in this sentence yet. But
Right.
perhaps something was tipping Tolkien off to saying like, no, there is something about this ring that needs a stronger dream, a subconscious undercurrent
Right.
to it.
And there's a name for this, and I don't know what it is. I'm not a literature professor, but there is a thing that happens with authors sometimes when they write books, where they will write, especially if they're totally invested in the book, and it's a very deep act for them, where they're pulling from their own originality, creativity, source material, whatever. They will write things that they don't even fully understand why they wrote them,
Yeah.
and then later on, people who read them, or the author themselves, or both, can go back and see connections that they didn't realize they were making. And just to be clear, yes, Tolkien did not intend originally, his waking mind, his consciously did not intend the ring to be anything sinister at first. But there was something a little I will say this about the ring, and I mean the magic ring, not the One Ring, because it was originally the magic ring. There's something unfair about the ring. It's contrary to the British sense of fair play. It's having, I mean, we're told about what a good lookout Balin is, but he's fooled by the ring. Bilbo is able to use the ring. I mean, being invisible, there's something a little sketch about invisibility from a moral perspective.
Yeah.
And so that's a very deep thought. There's a lot of I've heard philosophic takes on the idea of invisibility and its connection with moral evil, actually. But anyway, I don't think Tolkien had that in mind. I mean, magic rings that make you invisible are a thing that occur in folklore and fairy tales. So I think it's probably where he was getting it from. But I do think that it's possible that something like this dream could have been this sort of creative subconscious, where he's just saying something and he doesn't really know the meaning of it yet. But then as time goes on, he figures out what the meaning is. And he talks that way when he's talking about exploring his own work sometimes. Like, he discovers what it was that a person was saying or what they meant by something. And he does that all the time. So I think Tolkien is very open about the unconscious creative act. He's very he doesn't try to pretend that he has it all like a master in his head at once, and he's just expounding it. He's very much discovering the story along with his reader in certain senses.
Yeah, he makes that point that he didn't know who Strider was when he first started writing who he
right.
was. He was
and
discovering a story.
Which is a weird way of talking in one sense, right? You would think an author would say, well, who Strider was changed. I shifted who's, but he talks about it as I didn't know who Strider was, and I had to, basically he had to discover. So I could easily see him say the same thing about this dream sequence. He didn't know why Bilbo was referring to what the thing was he was looking for yet, and then he discovered it later. It was so anyway. I do think it's a ring reference. Is that what you think too? Is that
I agree. It's either that or it's a loaf of bread with butter.
Very direct from the previous from 2 sentences before.
Yeah, I mean, that would make the most sense, especially in reading it after his edits of 1951. That yes, this is definitely the One Ring. There's something eating at his mind, and he can't get it out, and it speaks to his subconscious somehow.
I like that you use the metaphor eating at his mind. Very Hobbit-like. Very Hobbit.
Well right, yeah. Anything to get more food references in here, I will do it.
That's what we do.
All right, guys. Next week we're going to get through Queer Lodgings.
Right.
First half of that. Sorry, was that too long of a pause waiting for something else to say? Guys, queer was not the word that so many of you like to think that it was back when Tolkien wrote this.
Yeah, that's right.
Just think of it as strange lodgings, weird lodgings, odd lodgings.
It's
not the YMCA.
Is my favorite line. My favorite line from The Princess Bride from Inigo Montoya. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
That's so true. Right. But we get to be Orn this episode or next week's episode, so that's gonna be cool.
Skin changers, man.
Yeah. Well,
an idea that I always thought Tolkien could have explored more in made more references to. It was sadly something mostly left behind, except for the appendix, I think. In Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. There's very little reference to that. Yeah, I don't think he ever. There's nothing in the Silmarillion about this. There's nothing in Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales or anything else. There's let's say there are no skin changers in any other story that he has in Middle Earth written, as far as we know. Anyway, we'll talk about that next week. Join us, guys, in the extended podcast by going to theonering.com/member. We're going to be talking about eagles and whether they should have just carried Frodo into Mount Doom. Or whether and what
I was just gonna say until then I was gonna sign off, but go for it. Say your last sentence.
I was just saying or like why did they only carry the dwarves around if like they owed a debt to Gandalf? We'll talk about that too. So until then,
all right, until then, avoid the fires, freeloaders.